Democrats wouldn't let a few inconvenient things, like a complete lack of evidence, to get between them and a good smear.
If she says yes and you can see that in her eyes, like you can notice that, like if you know her, you can see that.
What does it look like in her eyes when it's a yes?
Tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods that President Trump threatened in July are officially a reality, and so is China's $60 billion response. That means tariffs now affect more than half of Chinese exports to the U.S. and nearly everything sent the other way. And with Trump threatening another $267 billion round, soon there might not be any exports left to tax. Climate change is hitting U.S. national parks harder than the rest of the country. Scientists say data from 417 parks across 125 years show temperatures rose by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, twice the national rate. Researchers think that's because parks tend to sit at a higher elevation, where the atmosphere is thinner. Hong Kong has banned a group fighting for independence, the first time the city has outlawed a political party since Britain relinquished control to China 22 years ago. City authorities say they had to ban the Hong Kong National Party to protect national security and accuse the group of spreading, quote, hatred and discrimination against mainland Chinese.
I'm confused why there's so much confusion.
And I wish I could help with your confusion, but I too am confused with your confusion.
Conflicting leaks left networks confused as to whether Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had resigned, been fired, both, or neither. What we do know is that Rosenstein will meet with President Trump on Thursday, presumably to discuss reports that he considered invoking the 25th Amendment to remove his boss from office.
Polarizing confirmation fights are a fact of life in Washington. In truth, most of them are pretty routine. Most of the time, the shouting is just for show, and the American public isn't really engaged. That's not what's happening right now. The Kavanaugh nomination is unleashing wave after wave of chaos on Washington, and emotions on all sides, the members, the protesters, the accusers, are genuine and intense. Mitch McConnell is usually dry as a bone, but this was him today reacting to the New Yorker story that hit last night detailing Debbie Ramirez's story from Kavanaugh's Yale days.
Democrats wouldn't let a few inconvenient things, like a complete lack of evidence, or an accuser's request for confidentiality, to get between them and a good smear. It's despicable.
And around the Capitol, Democrats and activists were reacting just as angrily.
I will fight with everything I have to make sure we change this culture where women are disbelieved, where women are persecuted, where women receive death threats when they are assaulted. It's not acceptable.
Meanwhile, the people at the actual center of this storm made their resolution clear. The Judiciary Committee released a letter from Dr. Ford to Chairman Chuck Grassley written on Saturday. In it, she says she's frightened, but that her fear will not hold her back from testifying. And Judge Kavanaugh and his wife went on Fox News to defend his character in really personal terms.
We're talking about an allegation of sexual assault. I've never sexually assaulted anyone. I did not have sexual intercourse or anything close to sexual intercourse in high school or for many years thereafter. And the girls from the schools I went to and I were friends.
So you're saying that through all these years that are in question, you were a virgin?
That's correct.
Both will tell their side of the story at a Judiciary Committee hearing on Thursday. But what about the members themselves who are going to sit in judgment? This is a good moment to stop and remember that Congress is in a long-running sexual misconduct crisis of its own. One of the Judiciary Committee's own members, Al Franken, had to resign over Me Too revelations, joining a growing list of disgraced congressional men, which led to talk of changing how Congress deals with issues of sexual harassment in their workplace. They haven't done as much as today's speechifying might make you think. Late last year, Congress did mandate everyone who works on the Hill take sexual harassment training. And the House passed a bill in February to reform the process of what happens after an employee reports a harassment or discrimination violation. The Senate followed suit in May. But, and you knew this part was coming, the two bills are different, and until those differences are worked out, nothing changes. Aides on both sides of the aisle tell me that meetings are continuing to happen at the staff level to resolve the differences, but they wouldn't provide specifics. Kristen Nicholson, who was part of the group of ex-congressional staffers who banded together last year to make this an issue, is still hoping something can get done before the end of the year.
The House passed a bill, the Senate passed a bill, and none of that makes any difference until they can both agree on one identical version and send it to the president for his signature. So until then, we are back to where we were this time last year before anybody had started talking about this. None of these protections exist at the moment. And what we were very hopeful for was that, because there seemed to be bipartisan agreement that this issue needed to be addressed, and it was in many ways addressed much more quickly than a lot of issues are on Capitol Hill. We were really hopeful that this would be resolved by the end of this year. If it's not, as most people know, we're back to square one.
Is there a part of you that's hoping what's happening with Kavanaugh will goose Congress into doing something about this in their own house? Like, how do you relate these two things?
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be one small positive outcome of, all the insanity surrounding the Kavanaugh nomination. Yes, I'm hopeful that people will kind of maybe be jolted into a realization that this has been languishing for months and time is running out. And it's really important that if Congress is going to lead by example and sit in judgment of others on these issues, that they have their own house in order first.
The women who accused Brett Kavanaugh of assaulting them at parties were just teenagers at the time. Kavanaugh was a teenager too. Last year, the Department of Education investigated 150 claims of sexual violence at elementary and high schools, a jump of more than 500% from just 3 years before. Changing that may require changing students' attitudes. In Illinois, teachers with a publicly funded nonprofit are going class to class.
We're at a high school in South Chicago where they've started a program called What's Up with Manhood, where they're essentially trying to open up a discussion about sexual consent and trying to teach consent from as young an age as possible. Luciano Melin and Cordero Lewis are community educators working with mostly 14 and 15-year-old boys.
How do you all define consent?
I feel like it's not that simple. I feel like girls like to work their way around what they want you to know. And with guys, it's straight up.
What is so hard with waiting to hear, yes, we can, or no, we can't?
It's not hard. It's just that, in a moment, it'll be awkward to interrupt and, say something like that. So if they going along with it, then you know it's a yes. But if they, stopping you, then you know it's a no, and then you stop.
So silence is a yes?
No. Silence.
Not in all cases.
Silence could work.
Okay, not in all cases.
Is it confusing where that line of consent falls?
Sometimes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it can be.
Why is it so confusing?
You're not always sure about what they're going to say until they actually say it.
If she says yes and you can see that in her eyes, you can notice that. If you know her, you can see that.
What does it look like in her eyes when it's a yes?
Yes, please show us. I want to see what that looks like.
Show me what yes bedroom eyes look like.
You get that vibe, you know what she's trying to say, but she still tells you something else. She's trying to say yes, but you can see her body language, we're all talking about. She's saying no, basically. And sometimes the guy just wants to take advantage of that. Oh, she said yeah, so it's a yeah.
What I kind of want to get into is the concern of not knowing and still going that way. Because, let's be honest, you're putting yourself in a very dangerous legal situation.
Are you worried about, at one point, having someone accuse you of not asking for their consent or not being clear about that?
I wouldn't say that I'm not worried because, I can name a handful of times where the girl wanted to do it or whatever, but as soon as they break up, she gets mad, so she says that he raped her. Of course, I feel worried in the future because, you will never know, what she's gonna say about you. What she's gonna do.
How much of gender norms and this machoism plays a part in terms of the challenge that you guys are up against?
Guys don't talk. I mean, that's a whole machismo thing right there. I'm not gonna tell you what I feel. Yeah, I'm crying, so what? I'm crying. It's it's breaking that down to actually get to the root of an issue, get to the root of a problem.
And not only that, they don't want to be seen as weak. And that's also a thing, and being like a very hyper masculine thing, you know, to not show weakness, even if it is to my detriment.
How often does that gray area of consent come up for these kids?
I would say all the time. And it's not just as far as sexually. You know, I think the gray area is in all aspects of their lives as far as dealing with each other, you know? The guys feel as though the girls want a certain thing, but they're not communicating it. The girls feel as though the guys want a certain thing and they don't want to necessarily communicate that that's not what they're about. Or
the program that Medellin and Lewis run centers on a discussion about manhood. They don't typically reach out to young women, but we wanted to learn what girls at this age have experienced. Almost immediately, the gender gap in attitudes became very clear.
How many of your peers felt that they were pressured?
Majority. Yeah.
Majority? Wow. Okay.
Maybe they were scared that their boyfriend or girlfriend would leave them and maybe they didn't sleep with them. Maybe that's what it was.
The word consent can mean obviously many different things to each person, but like in my opinion, it's like when you're okay with the encounter before, during, and after. If that makes sense.
Ladies, what do y'all think about that?
Yeah, we agree. And it's also that like during at any point that if you say no, they're not just gonna be like, well, you already gave consent. It's at the point where they're like, okay, I understand that now you don't want to.
Do you feel like there's pressure from guys to have sex, or do you feel like guys come under pressure to have sex?
I feel like guys pressure other guys to have sex. Like if one of them is having sex, they're like, oh, why aren't you doing it? Or you're lame for not doing it yet, you know? For when it comes to girls, I feel like it's different, you know? Like if they haven't done it, then we don't really care.
Boys think that certain things girls do is giving consent, such as they see any little chance of it being consent, they'll be like, okay, they're gonna go for it. They just care about getting what they want.
They would probably say something like, oh, I thought you loved me, or, oh, don't you trust me, or stuff like to like kind of manipulate you and like, well, I mean, get you to overthink it to extent where you feel pressure to say yes and you feel pressure to do it because you love them so much and you care so much for them.
Have you been in a situation like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been in a situation before.
How did you resolve that?
I really cared about that guy, but it got to the point where he told me like, oh, like if you love me then you would do this, and then since I was scared of letting go and I've gotten so attached, I would tell him like, oh no, I don't want to, but then he even like kind of said it in a way like if I didn't, then he would just walk out. I was scared for him to do that.
Yeah. And so what happened?
Well, I got peer pressured into it, and that became my first time and my last. It taunted me, it taunts me. I didn't say no, but I also didn't say yes. I didn't give him an answer, he just automatically assumed.
President Trump opened a week of high-level meetings at the UN on Monday with a call for action against illicit drugs.
It's vital for public health and national security that we fight drug addiction and stop all forms of trafficking and smuggling that provide the financial lifeblood for vicious transnational cartels.
It's a message that one of the leaders in attendance has already taken to heart. Sheikh Hasina has been Prime Minister of Bangladesh since 2009. She's waging a war on drugs that's one of the most aggressive in the world.
The people on this drug raid represent the full force of the Bangladeshi government. There are officers from the police, the military, the Coast Guard, the Border Guard, and their version of the DEA. But the man in charge is a civilian, Prannoy Chakma, a local magistrate. They're looking for yaba, an illicit red pill composed of meth and caffeine. Authorities say it's mostly smuggled in from neighboring Myanmar.
তোমার নাম কি খাতো বেবে পালাচ্ছস কেন এই একে ধরেন খাতো বেবে She is one of the petty drug dealers.
Yaba use has surged in the last decade. In 2016, police seized 800 times more of the drug than 10 years earlier. That's given law enforcement all the justification they need to launch a massive wave of crackdowns.
Okay, so he's a user and she is a dealer?
Yes, he's a user of drug and she is a dealer.
Okay.
It smells sweet, right?
Where did you find that?
Inside her house.
Okay, so it's evidence of drug use?
Yes, it's totally evidential proved that she is a drug dealer.
In the US, finding drugs in someone's house would be important evidence. But here, it's enough to convict someone on the spot in blindingly quick proceedings that legal authorities here call a mobile court. The government says these expedite the judicial process and reduce the backlog of court cases. Immediately after the raid, the magistrate doles out convictions and jail time.
খাতো বিবির বাড়িতে গিয়ে আমরা বিভিন্ন ধরনের মাদক সরঞ্জাম আমরা পেয়েছি আপনাকে 2 বছরের বিনাশ্রম কারাদণ্ডে দণ্ডিত করা হলো
Since May, there have been more than 47,000 arrests, but there have also been hundreds of deaths so far. In a drug den on the outskirts of Dhaka, a handful of small-time yaba dealers agreed to talk to us if we obscured their identities. And they share a common suspicion about the real motive of the drug war.
Do you think all of the people being killed are associated with drugs, dealers or users?
যারা মাদকের ব্যবসায়ী তাদেরকে মারছে বিরোধী দল সন্ত্রাসকে মারতেছে বা আমি বললাম আমাকে টাকা দিয়ে মারলো বিরোধী দল বা টাকা দিয়ে মারা হয়েছে যারা ব্যবসা করতেছে ওরা তো রাজাহালে বয়ে রয়েছে চেয়ারের মধ্যে সংসদেই বয়ে থাকে ঠিক আছে আর নিরীহ মানুষে মারছে বিরোধী দল
It isn't just the drug dealers who think the government's drug war is really motivated by politics. And everyday Bangladeshis are starting to gather evidence.
So this is bullet holes there?
বুকের বাম পাশে 7টা বুলেট গুলি করছে
Amzad Hussain was a youth leader for the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or BNP, the main opposition. The police say Hussain was a drug dealer killed in a gunfight, but his family say the police lied.
হ্যাঁ ও কোনোদিন একটা সিগারেটও পর্যন্ত খায় নাই আর ওরা বলতেছে ড্রাগের সাথে শরীর
কোনোদিন এসে মধ্যে ডরাইছে না এর লাগে আরে মাইরা বিএমপিটাকে ঠান্ডা করছে
Hussain was just one of a growing number of opposition figures who've lost their lives. Adilur Khan, an activist opposing the drug war, played us a recorded phone call that he says captured the moment an opposition politician was killed.
See, you can hear the sound.
That's a gunshot?
Yes.
Khan and his team are tracking deaths in the drug war. He believes the police are using extrajudicial killings to intimidate the opposition ahead of a new round of voting.
These killings, repressions, this is mounting, running up to the elections. And that's why we are worried, and that's why we are documenting.
You think it's going to get worse in the months to come?
Yes.
Is there an atmosphere of fear that exists around that here?
It's a culture of fear. It's a situation where people are scared to talk.
No one from the government would agree to speak to us. So we tracked down the Minister of Home Affairs, who oversees the police, and approached him at an unrelated event.
We just wanted to talk about a separate issue. So the drugs crackdown over the last couple of months, why have such a high number of people been killed? And what's your response to accusations that some of those killings are politically motivated?
One thing I want to clear, we do not kill anybody.
I mean, there have been 182 people killed.
They use firearms. Then our security force cannot keep idle. law. Otherwise, they cannot give their life for this thing. They used to resist, and this thing happened when they can't find out.
And the accusations they're politically motivated, some of these killings, how do you respond to that?
No political motivated killing is not there. All are criminal or are listed.
Despite international concerns, Bangladesh says drugs are destroying the country and insists the crackdown will continue.
Today, the National Labor Relations Board resumed hearings into complaints that Tesla, the electric car maker, prevented its employees from unionizing. Tesla CEO Elon Musk, a devoted futurist who's aiming to make cars driverless, isn't known to have much patience for human concerns. But he may finally be warming up. In April, Musk tweeted that, quote, humans are underrated. He was referring to Tesla's experience making its new Model 3s with one of the most robotics-dependent assembly lines on the planet. That grand experiment failed to deliver nearly the number of cars Tesla promised. Tesla's Model 3s are made at a California plant where Toyota and General Motors once teamed up on their own early try at automation. That was a partnership called NUMMI, which closed in 2010, allegedly because of problems caused by over-reliance on robots. Tesla spent more than $2 billion revamping the factory and started making the new Model 3 there in July of 2017. Musk promised that the company would produce 5,000 of the cars each week by the end of that year. But when December came, they'd made fewer than 1,800 total. So Tesla called in humans. They hired people to oversee production and hosted a human brain-powered hackathon to solve the bottlenecks. Now, Model 3 deliveries are finally picking up, with nearly 27,000 cars delivered in the first half of this year.
Tesla is an extreme example of what you might dub excessive automation. At the moment, the set of occupations and tasks that robots can perform are still limited.
Basically, Tesla automates welding, painting, and shaping metal panels, just like other car factories do. But for the Model 3, they also automated final assembly, where cars get finishing touches like door handles and seat belts. Other manufacturers have learned that even parts made by robots can be slightly inconsistent. Humans are really good at making adjustments, like tossing out a bolt that doesn't fit or hammering a panel straight. But robots end up compounding small problems like these when they push through them. So Tesla ended up learning what we learned, that even as robots begin to help us more, they still need help from us. What do you think is the truth in the Aziz Ansari case?
I think there's a lot of truths. The overall truth is that our society has groomed both men and women not to communicate appropriately about sex.
Discussion has to be had between the two people about what can and can't go down.
Thank you.
All genders are looking back on past experiences with a new lens now. You can't put this back to the way it was.
I never get to forget, because even when I do, my body remembers.